What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Jake from In Heart's Wake. Thank you for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. I'm tuning in all the way from Byron Bay, Australia.
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of bands from Australia during this whole pandemic, I gotta say.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, which bands might I ask off the top of your head?
We interviewed Caligula's Horse, we interviewed Voyager, we interviewed Aversion's Crown, and that's off the top of my head. Witch Skull, really cool doom band. So quite a lot.
A few, okay.
Yep.
Can we just note on that coincidence? Caligula's Horse, and then
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been calling Australia the Sweden of the Pacific because of how many great metal bands are out there.
Huge. I like that. I often call Germany the Texas of Europe.
Wow, that's hilarious. But it's so awesome to have you here. Your new album, Kaliyuga, which is scheduled to come out later this year. Could these singles that you have out, Worldwide Suicide, Hellbringer featuring Jamie from Polaris, and Son of a Witch, almost serve as like a clear representation of what the whole album is going to sound like, or is this just scratching the surface?
I say scratching the surface because we haven't showed you the softer, more melodic side of the band in those three songs, and we also haven't really shown the more proggier side of the band, which we like to explore all terrain. This is what we do. This is what we like to do. So more to come.
Awesome. Do you consider this just sort of picking up where you left off after Arc, or being that it's been 3 years, you kind of consider this like a new beginning in a way for In Heart's Wake?
No, it's picking up. I mean, it's kind of like think of a season 1, season 2, season 3, and 4 of a TV show. Whilst it is a continuation, you do have new characters, and you also have a look at the writing and see what perhaps could have been done better, or what needs to come forth. So it's still the same band. Yes, it's some new producer from Arc has come back in. Happens to be one of the original producers, Josh Schroeder. So it's us in our growth. But there is a huge evolution in us looking at the world and feeling, this is what we feel needs to be said right now.
This could just me being, a fan of the band, but if you played me like 30 seconds of a song, I could tell that that's off of Arc, that's off of Skydancer, that's off of Earthwalker, so etc. So it's fair to say like you take maybe like a new approach to every single album, right?
Yeah. With Josh, when it comes to the sound of when we mix and master, we often think like, are we coming for like a youthful, brighter? Are we trying to come in from a lower, more epic? And we really trying to get into the sonic space of approaching it like a movie, as well as the songs within that. So it's good that you picked up on that. That's cool.
Yeah. Do you almost look at your entire catalog as maybe like a timeline, or maybe a bit of like a retrospective of who you personally are at that particular time? Is it like representative of that?
Yeah. There's for sure stories on those records, in particular the more personal ones, that are like diary entries for me. Moving through my 20s. So yeah.
You mentioned that with Kaliyuga, like people are, have yet to hear the more softer songs or the more progressive songs. But being that, Hellbringer and Worldwide Suicide is like more aggressive, do you feel that like when you do a song that's more melodic or more aggressive, it's almost expressing a different side of you emotionally?
Yeah, there's many colors to every human being, and they're all valid. So the anger and the rage and the frustration is equally as valid as the more emotive sides of being a bit more vulnerable. And in a metal scene, let's be honest, for the most part, the general consensus is metal is heavy and go hard or go home. And so it's nice for us to also experiment with those softer, more melodic sides. So yeah.
Do you like have like a preconceived idea with every single album, like, or even every single song, like what you want it to sound like, or does it usually kind of happen that way? Do you almost consider your songs like to be happy accidents sometimes?
There's intention behind like vision and theme and what we want to get across. In a broader net, and then we discover within that net what are the things that come forth, what feels good. Don't force like, we're missing this color, so we have to do this. It's more like, do we want to do this because it's missing? Oh yeah, that sounds good. Let's go with that. So I like to think of it more like that, and then you start to look at all the children. You know, you've got all these little babies, and you're like, okay, they can't always all make the album. We have to. There's overflow. Sometimes we have to cut back and just choose the ones that we feel fit together, in a flow. So there's that as well.
Yeah. You ever worried like the songs you leave out of the album will be like a B-side one day, just be the biggest hit you guys ever had?
No, I'm not worried. But it's funny when we talk about B-side, we instantly think it's not as good as, or it's second rate. You know, a B-side. But in some ways, it's like just the puzzle piece that doesn't fit. But it doesn't mean that it's not, an A-side track.
Yeah, it's still coming from you. It's coming from the same heart and the same mind and the same hands. It has to pose some significance despite it not making the record.
That's right. And sometimes timing is everything with a song. Some songs coming out now or in 5 years' time, they can be ahead or behind their times. So there's always that to take into account of where the world's at and what you feel as an artist is needing to be shared.
Yeah, and kind of going back to like, the heavier songs versus the more melodic songs, is it almost kind of like representative? Do you try to make your songs capture a moment? Is it like representative of how you or the rest of the band were feeling at that particular time when you wrote it?
When you look back in retrospect, there's some nostalgic, it does strike some notes and some chords that bring me back to that headspace or that heart space. But when you're writing it, I don't think, when you listen to your favorite song at the time, for instance, and you're doing what you're doing, you don't think, oh, this encapsulates me perfectly right now. So anyway, when you listen back on it, you go, wow, that reminds me of me in high school, like doing this time. So you don't know it at the time, but they end up flavoring that moment, that experience, and it's upon reflection that you realize it, I think.
Yeah, I'd imagine also, too, like the longer that you're working on something, the harder it is to sort of capture or even maintain that same moment or that emotion as well, right?
It can be. Sometimes it's great to put things down and then revisit them a year later. And there's a couple of songs on this record that we'd written like 2 years before the record was finished, just as some riffs and some choruses and some parts. And then we brought them back. And then there's other songs like Worldwide Suicide. It was written in about 3-4 hours. Wow. The whole thing. Like, and tracked.
That's impressive.
There's no right way or correct way to do things. You have to just, you've got to get in that. I'm learning more and more to be present with my gut feeling. How does it feel? Is it flowing? Is it not? When to take a step back? When to pursue? And again, there's no right way to even approach that. So, but just being when you're in it, it helps. It's been helping me to see what's next and where I'm at.
Yeah, and kind of course, we're expressing like the emotion through the voice and stuff, but then there's also lyrics in mind as well. Do you sometimes need to hear music before you come up with lyrics, or is there ever a time where maybe a subject matter or a concept can determine the outcome of the music itself?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. It can be the chicken and the egg sometimes. I've got pages and pages and pages of one-liners or connecting sentences, things that when it comes to me or I'm inspired by something in conversation, I'll just write it down. And if I'm given a piece of music, I might be listening to that piece of music and open up those pages, and if something jumps off the page as that music's playing, or it just fits the melody or perhaps fits a rhythm or a tone, then I will use that and build around that. And other times we'll start with a line and a vibe to say, hey, we want to have a repeating part, and this is the line we want. For instance, it's a worldwide, so it's, that, and then we build around it and go outwards.
Yeah. And I know, and aren't you always worried that you'll have the best lyrics ever, and then they're always one syllable or over or under the actual arrangements?
Yeah, it often ruins the best of poetry, and also in turn, lyrics and melody often ruin the best riffs, because you have to get rid of a contrasting note in a riff that perhaps conflicts with a melody, or perhaps it doesn't fit with the vocals, so we have to drop a hit. But it's that marrying of the two which makes it what it is, and it's you listen to a piece of music, and that's the expression and the coming to an agreement between 5 people that we all agreed. These are all the choices that we made for it to be this, and that's what's so cool about a finished song.
Yeah, definitely. And do you try to leave the lyrics open to interpretation? Because I know that a song, I believe it was Son of a Witch, which was inspired by the 2018 Malibu fires. Do you like to leave lyrics open to interpretation, or do you try to maybe engage the listener to maybe seeing things from your point of view?
For the most part, it has been a little. The feedback that I've been getting is it's been a bit like broad or quite visual, and then with Hellbringer, it was much more specific. So that I still believe it's all subjective to how it jumps off the page at you, but they're not completely riddles. No, they're I often say what they mean in liner notes, and I'm writing with intention rather than to just be like so aloof and ambiguous. You have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. It seems like you're able to be both very literal and very metaphorical behind your lyrics, right?
I like to paint pictures. I see things much more visually than I do. I do sonically too, but visual is more. And then there's the soundtrack, and I get the visuals behind that, and then that's how the story you tell what you see. Mm-hmm. So that's how that's been working for me. Where some of the guys are like, that's an E minor flat, and that's they can pick it apart that way, and that's just not how I operate.
Yeah, and you mentioned you have things that are very visual. Do you almost look for inspiration, or does inspiration just come out of the blue, or do you need to maybe put yourself in a certain place in order to get into writing mode?
You have to remain open for sure. I worked at a movie theater for 8 years when I was 8 years, and just being exposed to so many films. I love movies, but I loved being exposed to art house and quirky foreign films as well, and that really helped open my mind and my awareness of storytelling. And I'm out in nature constantly because that's where I find balance, and I get back in touch with myself and perspective and everything, and I can just be quiet. So when I'm out there, lyrics will drop in or themes will drop in often. And it's not a going out there saying, hey, I need something to drop in and really asking for it or trying to dig it out. It flows when it needs to.
Yeah, and you're ready for the most difficult question of the whole interview?
Go for it.
Because that led me imperfectly into this. How do you know when a song is done?
Usually when you have a deadline.
Oh, come on. We were doing so good. Don't give me something that anticlimactic.
Well, the thing is, when you're in a studio, right, you're making music. You could have written the song 2 years ago, but when you're in the studio and you're actually tracking it, things change. Things are going to change. You discover new things, but you can keep tweaking and playing with that song. But at the end of the day, once you leave that studio, that is what I call the deadline. That's the anything we change here is starting to mess with it, and also we're out of time. So it's an opportunity there to find, discover new things. But once you leave the studio, that's it,
Mm-hmm. That's fair enough. And being such a visual learner as well, I was really intrigued actually by the movie theater story you told me. I didn't know this until now. But being such a visual artist into your music, does that translate into the presentation of the album as well? I loved the music video that you released for Hellbringer. So do you almost does your vision almost not even just influence the lyrics, but maybe the presentation of the entire album as well?
Yeah, 100%. In one of the bios, someone had written the visual architect, so to speak, in saying that because I'm approaching these lyrics by seeing visuals when it comes to the music videos. I've written every single music video we've done, and I've produced a couple, but I've also been directed the last few, or co-directed at least. And so having that consistency from inception of song to the film clip really helps, I feel, bridge and translate what the song is trying to say, and that goes right into the album artwork. I'm working with the artists that I choose to work with. I give them a concept and sketches and everything, and we work on that religiously together, over the course of a couple months to get it to that final product. That's
actually really, really fascinating that you mentioned that. I didn't know that you helped with the music videos, in terms of the directing or the production. Does this vision come after you have the song decided that you want to make the video for, or do you sometimes, does the vision and the song almost happen simultaneously?
With Son of a Witch, I was telling a story from a lyrical point of view, of hard and difficult times for the matriarchy back when the witch burnings were taking place. And we're seeing it in different ways, only the earth is being burnt by the patriarchy now. So the story's embedded and in place, placed there. So when we come to now and we're looking at what singles to choose, it does help when there's a story to tell something. I feel that storytelling is such a powerful thing to what we do as artists on any field. So, yeah, seeds are planted, but I really flesh it out when we all decide these are the singles that are happening. And then I use those seeds and just literally just feed them and expand. And I also have to look at the climate of 2020 and the restrictions that has to see, like, okay, what needs to be said, what needs to be told. So it's a constant evolution process.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned storytelling because, being a painter myself, there's a difference between a painting and an illustration. Like, an illustration has to convey a narrative, and I feel like that's sort of like what In Heart's Wake has always done I feel like your songs are sonic illustrations because they do convey, like, a narrative. Do you feel like a listener should, like, listen to Kaliyuga starting off with Crisis and ending with 2033, or can a listener, like, approach this album from many different angles?
I would love for them to listen to top to back, top to bottom, whatever you want to say, for sure. And there's a reason why Crisis. There's a reason why it's bookended by Crisis in 2033, without a doubt. That's not to say you can't just pick out a song and enjoy it. Yeah, that's where I stand with it.
Okay, that's fair enough. And kind of going back to the whole music video thing when it comes to, this vision and, being very hands-on with it, is there maybe a similar creative energy into working visually versus with the music, or is it almost like two separate creative mind frames altogether?
I believe they take place in the, in that alpha brainwave space of creativity where you have to draw upon things that might not be in front of you. It's an imagination is kind of where I'm coming from. You've got to really call upon that. So I feel the same in both. The difference between the lyrics is when it comes to rhyming in terms of poetry and rhythm, it's got a little bit more structure to it as opposed to writing music videos. Whilst they do have to have a catharsis and an act, the acts have to be there, the beats, you can dream up a little bit. You can be a bit more freer with the way that you storytell visually, I feel.
Mm-hmm. And are your albums almost kind of like Lord of the Rings in a way, where in order to understand, maybe like if somebody just discovered you guys on Kaliyuga, maybe they'd have a better understanding if they listened to Ark before that, and then have a better understanding of Ark if they listen to Skydancer and so on and so forth?
No, it's not something that you have to, sit. Yeah, you have to have seen The Fellowship in the Two Towers for Return of the King to make sense. But I do feel that Return of the King definitely has its payoff if you've seen the other two, for sure. It just makes it that much more. It's more of a payoff. Yeah, it's got more of a payoff because you've explored the other elements, and you've been a part of our growth and a part of our journey. But this is a standalone record. Every record stands on its own as a different element or a foundation. But in support of them all, I'd like to believe, this encapsulates the last 8 years of the band going through this journey of having to do music videos with these elements, as well as be in that headspace of what those elements even mean in terms of, like, emotionally how to be in touch with, like, that urgent fire, as opposed to getting really earthy and planting trees. So there's lots of different things that we've touched on. But Kaliyuga's, I feel really good about Kaliyuga.
Yeah, and kind of like, every artist wants to evolve, you know what I mean? Whether it's in their sound or, their songwriting process. I would certainly hope that when you constantly put out new music, you want it to be better than what you were doing previously. But do you think as you further moved on to your career, do you think that maybe your older albums have gotten a little more context from your newer ones? Can that ever influence that? Like, do you feel that maybe like Earthwalker has a little bit more context because you put out Skydancer and Ark and Kaliyuga after that and so on and so forth?
Bit more context. It's really a tough one. It's one of probably the most like, in terms of topics of the comments that you see on any band's post or any artist is go back to your old shit. Like, go back and do this, I miss that. And that's more a symptom, like I was going to say, it's more of a symptom of humanity to miss and fear things that aren't going to be the same again.
Of course.
And so that's going to be there. But it's like, I hate to use a tree analogy, but, you can plant a tree, but you can't foresee. It's going to spiral towards the sun, or you hope it will, but you can't foresee what and how much fruit it's going to bear. You just don't. There's just no way of knowing. And what you want is something to evolve. You don't want to just stay the same. So this is definitely an evolution. Every record is an evolution. You learn things from the past for sure, or perhaps what didn't translate as well live. But we're going to keep evolving. We are always going to keep evolving. So in context, they're just markers on the wall of how high we were at that point, or what we were going through at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you were saying?
No. I'm trying to think. Just you're talking about context. I like to think that they all stand on their own. I really do.
Of course. And what's funny is I love what you said is because I can't stand it either when people say go back to your old stuff, go back to your old stuff. It's like I've always said nostalgia is the worst enemy of art in general. Because everybody is sad, oh, CDs aren't really a thing anymore, whatever happened to that. I'm like, but let's be real. Do you think when books were first invented, there were probably some people saying, if it's not carved on stone, I'm not going to read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, that's great. That's a great one. And vinyl. I mean, vinyl's had a resurgence, right?
Yeah, of course. So I think there'll always be evolutions and going back within reason and so on. I think the best way for fans to identify with the bands that they like is to grow and evolve with the artists in a way,
Yeah, just to accept and absorb it. It doesn't have to be everyone's cup of tea, though. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. But yeah, throwing those go back to when you were this age is like saying, I don't like who you are now, and it's not it's not hurtful in the slightest, but it is it limits. There's definitely a limiter, and it puts a roadblock up from enabling and allowing yourself to see perhaps what's coming through. And I mean, I've been there. I don't like this album as much as I like that old one. It's just what we get used to.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you can just refresh and look at it with new eyes and ears, it does help. For the most part, though, Hellbringer, honestly, it's one of the most. That and Worldwide Suicide have been some of the most positive feedback we've ever had on songs ever.
Within good reason, those are kick-ass songs.
Thanks, man. So, but there's no way of knowing that they were going to be that. It's just what we just enjoyed where they were and what they were. You can't there's no formula to having success in terms of a success rate of the public opinion. There's just no way. You've just got to make art and just be behind it no matter what because you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And you feel good about it.
Yeah. And if you do the same thing, you're repetitive and you're nothing new and you're playing it safe. And if you experiment too much, you either sold out or you're directionless or whatever. So it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't.
That's right. That's totally right.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is, even though my listeners and viewers are probably sick of me asking this at this point, but I've always, as I said before we started rolling, I've considered Australia to be the Sweden of the Pacific. I mean, collaborating with Jamie from Polaris, which I thought was like a match made in heaven. That's like the ultimate Australian metalcore collaboration. But with you guys and Thy Art Is Murder and Parkway Drive and so many other great bands, it almost seems like in your region of Australia, there's kind of like a scene that your style of music is ultimately popularizing in?
Ultimately popularizing it? I don't know what it's like to have your perspective in terms of listening to the music that comes out of here and feeling like, oh, that's Australian. Can you tell by ear that that's Australian, minus an accent, perhaps? I'm curious.
Sorry?
Can you, when you listen to Australian bands, beyond the accent of the vocalist, do you know that that's Australian? Or does that, could it be from anywhere in the world?
So it's funny you mention that because, and not to pigeonhole you guys by any means, but for lack of, to make this conversation go a little bit quicker, considering you guys metalcore, when I first heard metalcore music, I was like, it was All That Remains and Kill Switch and Shadows Fall. And I was like, oh, every time I heard a band of that style, I assumed they were from Massachusetts. But then I discovered Atreyu and As I Lay Dying, and then I was like, they must be from Orange County. After I heard Parkway Drive and North Lane, then I was like, wow, maybe this band must be from Australia. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kind of seeing maybe some sort of like correlation in a way.
Yeah, it's almost it's hard to say that like you listen to North Lane or Parkway. I could see some kill switch things with Parkway perhaps, but like it's still to say like, oh yeah, it's the same as Lay Dying is just like it's kind of not. So I wonder, it's heavy music, but like yeah, can you put it in a metalcore pigeonhole? I don't know. I do think why I think Australian bands are they're revered around the world. The ones that have made it across the border. That's the feedback I kept getting back. Is like, how do you have so many bands? Like, what are they feeding you? Like, what is it? Like, what's in the water? And I always come to the thing to say like we're like an isolated island essentially. There are so many bands from Australia that the world doesn't know about. They may never make it out of Australia. Because of physical means in terms of like resource and to take that plane which costs 10 grand to get a band anywhere. So what it's done is it's made like I don't want to say survival of the fittest, but it makes you become a stronger band in order to get on that plane and make that intentional decision to go out into the world. And that is what makes bands become stronger, because they have to work together better as a team and they have to make every show count. So that's a cool thing that I've seen with the bands that have made it out, and we do have to bond together more. A sense of community needs to really come back, like it was in hip hop and rap for so long. The underground really has to work together. So I'd love to see more collaboration.
Definitely.
I really would.
Definitely. And kind of going back to like the whole metalcore thing, I've always thought that I never understood. Like I ask people all the time, as as a journalist, my job is to be a total pain in the ass and a buzzkill at a show and interview fans as well, and totally kill the vibe for them. But like, I ask them, what is metalcore? Define metalcore, and 9 times out of 10 they say, oh, it's music that has singing and screaming in. I'm like, so does that make Opeth metalcore? Does that make Fear Factory metalcore? Does that make Deftones metalcore? Like, so I've always thought, what is metalcore? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's time to have some, like we need a brains trust of people we have opinions we respect to sit in a circle and have hold counsel and say, hey, what are the subgenres here? Let's unpack these, because it's become such a loosely thrown around term that it's hard to really to know what that umbrella means when you say, oh, it's a metalcore band.
Yeah,
Too broad.
The funniest is when somebody just says a word and adds the word core at the end of it, and then you go on Wikipedia and you just find like 3 bands of that whole subgenre.
Yeah, we've had earthcore and naturecore. We've had like a whole bunch of funny ones. I mean, heavy music is very broad, but I feel like there's a lot of metal. I think of, you tell me about metal, I'll go straight to like Metallica, like Slayer, Iron Maiden. I start to go like that's where not the origins, but when it became big. Even like Guns N' Roses were like a stem from rock, and thinking that they weren't metal, but it was rock, but there was things pulled out of that. So, and then hardcore, it's a completely different strain.
Yeah, which is something I never understood. How people can love metal and hate hardcore. That's something I'll never understand. I love Agnostic Front and Sick of It All, and I love Metallica and Slayer, so I never understood how people could really be so picky about that type of heaviness.
Do you think hardcore was born from punk, for sure.
Of course.
But do you think that metal was born from rock, or metal was born from hardcore?
Rock, definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah, because when Black Sabbath, which is ultimately the band that's considered to be... I've considered Beethoven to be the first metalhead, but like if you want to talk about the first metal band, it's obviously Black Sabbath. And, metal wasn't a genre at all when they started. They down-tuned their stuff. And Ozzy was singing about the devil and death and everything, and it was new at the time, so they called it metal, but they weren't calling it that. Now I'm seeing people call Black Sabbath doom metal. I'm like, what? They weren't even calling themselves metal when they first started. So
yeah. Can we go back and change genres?
Yeah. They need to make a periodic table for it.
Yeah. The Beatles are actually punk.
I thought they were polka hardcore.
Polka hardcore, nice. Yeah, I think we need some subgenres, perhaps, but no use of core. Let's change that.
Yeah, right? Everything is good except for the core, just like an apple. I'm kidding. But Before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this discussion. Just obviously, because of a certain virus that shall not be named, obviously touring is not happening at the moment, but I'd imagine that with the new album coming out, when all this is over, we'll be seeing you guys on the road quite a bit, right?
Yeah, of course. We had an American planned. We've got a lot of American listeners and fans, so it is so much, it means a lot to us to get there, and it's a huge priority of ours. So we'll be there. The records of the vinyl have already sold out, I believe, in America. So we know that the fans are there, and we'll get there when we can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jake. Everybody, we are here with Jake of In Heart's Wake, Kaliyuga coming out very soon. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.